Welcome to the Deadly Diaries, where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime. Jill Dando, born in 1961, was a celebrated British television presenter and journalist, best known for her work with the BBC. She presented Crime Watch, BBC Breakfast, and won BBC Personality of the Year in 1997. Born in Weston-super-Mare, she overcame childhood health challenges and had to undergo heart surgery at the age of 3, following the discovery of a hole in her heart and a blocked pulmonary artery. Jill rose to national prominence quite quickly and became a trusted face on British television. She was widely loved for her warmth, professionalism, and public visibility, making her murder especially shocking. At the time of Jill's death, she was engaged to Alan Farthing, a British gynecologist who was the head of the Department for Gynecological Cancer at Imperial College and also a private consultant. On the morning of April 26, 1999, Jill Dando drove from her fiancé's home in Chiswick, West London, where she spent most of her time, to her own house in Fulham, West London, to work on the sale of her property. Jill arrived home at around 11:32 a.m. and, as she reached her front door on Gowan Avenue, she was grabbed from behind by a gunman who forced her onto the ground into a crouching position and then shot her once in the back of the head at point-blank range, with the muzzle of the gun pressed firmly against her head at the moment of discharge. The exact place she was shot was on the left side of her head, just above her ear. The bullet went through her head and caused an indentation on the lower part of her front door, which was recovered as evidence. The handgun was a modified 9mm semi-automatic pistol, and the shot was reportedly muffled, which basically means silenced, which is why her next-door neighbor, Richard Hughes, heard a scream but no gunshot. It wasn't until about 14 minutes later that her neighbor discovered her body and called the police. She was rushed to Charing Cross Hospital and pronounced dead just after 1 p.m. However, it is thought that she died instantly. The bizarre part of this case is that there were no eyewitnesses of the actual murder. Despite it being in one of the most populated cities in the world, and no one heard the gunshot, it is reported that Jill's skull muffled the sound of the gunshot, which is why it was not heard. The only witness was the neighbor who heard a woman, Jill, scream. He described it as a scream out of surprise. He is said to have looked out of the window but couldn't see anyone, as there was a large tree outside of Jill's house which serves as a privacy screen, if you will. He did, however, report that he saw a man walking away from the scene shortly after, described as about 6 feet tall and around 40 years old. There were many people of interest in the first instance. 150 people. These are people who were trying to access Jill's phone records, banking officials spying on her account to see where her money is going, and someone trying to pay her bills for her. These were quickly ruled out. There were also other theories that were floated early on: professional hit, Serbian retaliation for her Kosovo appeal, revenge for Crime Watch episodes, or an obsessed fan. The professional hit theory seemed most probable, as there was a Crime Watch episode on the murder of Jill Dando, which was ironic because she used to present that show. The murder sparked one of the largest homicide inquiries in Metropolitan Police history. Investigators interviewed over 2,500 people and took more than 1,000 statements, and traced 1,200 vehicles, and police pursued hundreds of leads, CCTV footage, suspicious vehicles, including a blue Range Rover, and numerous tips from the public over the period of a year. But despite the scale of the investigation, no firm forensic trail immediately pointed to a suspect. Nearly 1 year after the murder, police shifted focus to a local man, Barry George, aged 39. He lived only a short distance from Jill's home, had a history of odd behavior and criminal convictions, including attempted rape, indecent assault, impersonating a police officer, and also an incident where he was arrested in the grounds of Kensington Palace for wielding a knife and rope with a handwritten note to Prince Charles. Oh, and he was wearing a balaclava. He was also known locally as a bit of a loner and fantasist. He claimed bizarre things like that he was related to Queen frontman Freddie Mercury, and that had been in the SAS. So why didn't they look into him earlier? Especially because he was in the original list of people that were being investigated. How he became a suspect. Firstly, he worked at the BBC for a short period of time, but even when he left, he would still come back to the office, which is very weird behavior, because who keeps visiting an old workplace you're no longer being paid from? The link here is that Jill Dando was of course a BBC presenter. As mentioned, the police had already received tips about his weird and erratic behavior. He was also known to be a gun enthusiast and had trained with the Army Reserve, which gave authorities enough information to go on to really investigate him because in their eyes he was combat trained and possibly knew how to use a gun. In addition to this, a photo of him holding a handgun was found, which led detectives to believe that this could have been the murder weapon. Surveillance and investigation eventually focused on him, in which they found several magazines with Jill Dando on the front cover and 2,000 pictures of women he had taken photos of, with a map of hundreds of their home locations without their knowledge, and it was discovered that he was actively stalking 400 women. The pivotal piece of evidence, however, was that a coat matching the description the neighbor provided when Jill Dando was murdered was found in Barry's house and when examined, was found to have gun residue matching gun residue found at the crime scene. This led to his arrest in May 2000. Barry George was charged and tried at the Old Bailey, in which he pleaded not guilty. The prosecution's case relied on circumstantial evidence, notably a single particle of firearms discharge residue, FDR, found in the pocket of his coat, said to match residue from Dando's wound. Police also uncovered hundreds of photographs of women in his flat, gun paraphernalia, magazines, and odd memorabilia. After a lengthy and highly publicized trial, a jury found him guilty on July 2, 2001, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Judge Gage described the murder as premeditated and planned, but conceded the motive might never be known. However, the case against him was controversial. The evidence was largely circumstantial. It was very suspicious that all of the information gathered on Barry George and the evidence found was all pointing to him. That shouldn't have really been enough to sentence him with the murder of Jill Dando, especially without complete and concrete evidence. Barry's defense team also argued that he lacked the cognitive sophistication to plan the killing. He struggled to plan the most simple of tasks in his normal daily life. So how could he plan a murder? After Barry George's sentencing, the courts received several appeals because the evidence was just not enough to sentence him to life. The first appeal was rejected in 2002, and he remained imprisoned. In 2007, however, the Criminal Cases Review Commission re-examined the case and found that the firearms residue evidence was flawed, and that new expert evidence cast serious doubt on its reliability. The residue was so minute that it could have potentially been residue from a firework or a sparkler, but it seemed the reason for not ruling it out in the first place is because Barry George fit the bill for Jill Dando's murder. The CCRC referred the case back to the Court of Appeal. In November 2007, the Court of Appeal quashed his conviction and ordered a retrial. In August 2008, after the retrial, Barry George was finally acquitted after 8 years of wrongful imprisonment. Despite being wrongly accused and imprisoned, he did not receive any compensation for the time spent in prison. This would leave the murder officially unsolved, which shocked the whole UK. Although the case remains open, there have been recent investigative developments in the way of modern forensic reviews. Reports suggest that updated DNA and forensic analysis has yielded new clues, and although detectives are hopeful that this may help with identifying the killer, it has not yielded anything of worth. There have been a lot of other theories and suspects. International motive theories, such as retaliation by Serbian paramilitaries connected to NATO illegal bombing campaigns on Serbian broadcast station which killed 16 people. NATO expressed that this was due to propaganda about Serbian war being circulated. Horrific way to retaliate and completely illegal. Because the UK was a big part of NATO, the Serbian parliament wanted to attack the BBC directly. There was a call to BBC on the day of Jill murder by the Serbian regime who claimed responsibility. But was it real? Also, 3 weeks before her death, she presented a charity appeal to raise money for people impacted by the Serbian regime. This could be another reason. Recent media even pointed to a Serbian assassin figure, Milorad Ulemek, as a potential person of interest, based on stylistic comparisons with a suspect seen on CCTV near the murder scene, though this remains speculative and unproven. Even more theories. Killed by a BBC pedo ring. Jill Dando allegedly, not confirmed, expressed that there was a BBC pedo ring and that she would publicise it, and someone who was a member of the pedo ring was made aware of Jill's plans and ordered the murder of Jill Dando. There are plenty of cases like this in the BBC. Maybe she did know something. Shot by a crazed stalker. Criminal ordered hitman due to Crime Watch having people arrested. Killed by the IRA. Murdered by Spanish barman. Important note, none of these lines of inquiry has resulted in a charge. The murder of Jill Dando left a deep mark on British public consciousness. It seemed everything in her life was going perfectly, personally and professionally, until it didn't. It was one of the UK's most high-profile killings, sparking national shock and intense media focus. Documentaries, including Who Killed Jill Dando, on Netflix, have re-examined the case, interviewing investigators and revisiting key evidence. Barry George has given interviews stating his conscience is clear and asserting his wrongful conviction. The case remains unsolved decades later and continues to fascinate and frustrate investigators, journalists, and true crime audiences alike. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Deadly Diaries. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to stay connected with stories that matter. And remember, if you or someone you know is in danger, please seek help. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and never stop asking why.